Hey, what's up, everybody? As always, I'm Austin.
And I'm Colin.
This is Campus Life Live Edition, the rare time that we do one of these. I see a ton of viewers in here already. That's
Yeah.
great. For those that have just picked up the YouTube channel recently, we're a podcast, Campus Life. We are the college half of the Campus to Canton podcast here at Campus to Canton. Austin, Colin, we've been the host since day one. This is episode 172. And the reason we're going live is because I've been out for the past 2 months and I'm back. And I am such a narcissist that I was like, big announcement. Here I am. I'm back. I had a really good holiday. I had a good break. Colin, thank you for holding down the show for me. Did you have a good holiday too? We exchanged gifts. We can talk
We
about
did.
that here too.
We did. Yeah. It was a good holiday. We don't have to travel much for ours for either side of my family. So yeah, anytime you can see family, not have to travel too much, always a good thing.
Yeah, that is a good thing. And we didn't have to travel at all this year, which was great. So
good point.
No complaints there. So Colin and I each lost a bet to each other. So we kind of turned this into a holiday gift exchange. We both did home field bets. So what we did is we gave each other a list of teams of like we just don't want stuff from. Mine had Penn State. I was a Pitt fan. I had Penn State on it, West Virginia. I didn't want any Michigan stuff. No Texas A&M. No Miami. Might have had one other one. It's really funny. I asked my wife. I think there were 7 schools on the list I gave you. I said, I just gave Colin this list. Can you guess the schools that are on it? And she guessed 6 of the 7 right away. She didn't guess Notre Dame. Notre Dame was the other one.
That's fair.
Yeah. So that was fun. But we gave each other a list. And then we said, okay, buy a shirt, ship it to us. And this is what we came up with. So Colin got me this nice home field apparel, TCU Horned Frogs. Cool color, cool emblem. Go TCU. We're getting horny in here tonight. And Colin, show them the shirt that I got you. I literally went through every single school on home field apparel to find this, by the way. App State Kazoo Band competition shirt. It's apparently a tradition there. I have no idea. If there's an App State alum or fan in the show right now, let us know more about this Kazoo Band challenge. But that's the one that I found for you, Colin. I hope you like it. I thought it was just so obscure that's the fun stuff you find on home field apparel. And by the way, I used promo code Campus to Canton to get 50% off. Did you use it too, Colin? Okay, cool.
I did. Yep.
Okay, so there you go.
Had to create a new account, actually, new email address.
And you can do that too, folks. Go ahead, hop on Home Field Apparel, Campus to Canton, the full name, get you 50% off your purchase over there, your first purchase. And if it's your second purchase, we've said this so many times, you know what to do. You create that new email address. Who doesn't have 40 email addresses for things already just to buy stuff and, stay incognito as you're purchasing things. So, yes. All right. So new year, Colin, we're rolling over everything at Campus to Canton. And just to get ahead of this question, which we are getting a lot right now, our rankings on the site will start removing all of the guys that are moving to the NFL officially between January 15th, which is the deadline to do that, for anybody that did not know that, and the end of the month. So by the end of the month, all of our ranking sets will have all of those players removed from them. And then at the end of the month, we will begin adding the incoming freshman class. So that's, your Jeremiah Smiths, your Dylan Rayolas, all of those kind of guys. We'll add those guys in toward the end of January as well. We don't really see a rush to do so. No one's drafting right now. And I think some of the people at Campus Can't probably need a little bit of a break. I think that's also part of it. But we just want to make sure we get it right and we have complete lists of everything before we're removing guys. So that to get ahead of that question. But here's tonight's show. I think this is how Campus Life is going to kind of flow through the year here in 2024. New year, new us. We're going to kind of break down kind of how we build our process through the year, starting at the beginning of the year. What do Colin and I do with our rankings and our opinions and even our own leagues that we're in when the year rolls over and now you're already making decisions based on just tons of new information. So we're going to start that tonight. We're going to talk a little bit about what we learned from last year, how I think we're going to apply it here in the new year. We're going to talk about just process, how we're starting to build our rankings. We're going to touch on some specific news items that really have already changed how we're ranking some things, not just talk in generalities. And we're going to take a bunch of questions from you guys too. So if you're in the chat here with us, I see there's a ton of people on here with us tonight. Feel free to drop questions in. If we don't even get to them immediately, we will get to them at some point, hopefully here throughout the show. We get some pre-show as well in our Discord. So I think that's covers all of our bases for what we're doing here tonight, Colin. Is that correct?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I just want to say welcome back.
Thank you.
It was I held the fort down, did some solo shows.
I wouldn't know. I didn't listen.
Had some guests on. I know. I wasn't surprised at all. There were a couple of times where I'm like, "Oh, Austin's gonna make a comment in the Slack about this," and I got nothing. So I was just talking to nobody apparently. But yeah, good to have you back.
So I was listening to podcasts through the beginning of December because when I was working out while I was away, I just popped in a podcast. But then we got a Peloton, and that's all I do now. I'm so hooked on this Peloton. And they talk to you during the thing. So I'm like, I kind of be a dick to, listen to a podcast while this person is killing themselves on this bike to try to walk me through this. So I haven't listened to any recently. I'm going to have to figure out the balance there, how I incorporate podcasts back into my day.
I still listen to podcasts while I work out on a Peloton. So my work office has a gym and we have 2 Peloton bikes, a Peloton treadmill. I still just volume all the way down, pop my headphones in, listen to podcasts.
How do you know what you're supposed to do? I mean, I know sometimes it tells you, cadence and resistance and everything. Oh, subtitles.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll think about that.
Put on closed captioning, then it tells you. The closed captioning is usually pretty accurate. Sometimes it'll be like, I want you to run at a between a 6.5 and a 9 or whatever, and they'll say a 6.5 and a 9. If you're based on the pace, and then it's kind of messes it up. So you do have to still look at the little screen at the bottom. But that helps.
Okay. I haven't used one of their treads before, just the bike. And I was a total noob to that. But I lost my Peloton V card and definitely not going back. Definitely not going back. We're not sponsored by Peloton. Maybe we should be.
We should be.
These throughout the year. So, all right. Well, let's just get right into the show here, Colin. Let's start with what we learned in 2023. I will say, actually, before we do that, 2 things. One, longtime listeners to this show may remember that in the past, anytime Colin has gotten out of line, I have tended to dip toward the reminder that of all the leagues that Colin and I have played in over the years, Colin has never won any of them. Just a hilarious stat. He's had 1 seeds that have just run roughshod through the regular season, lost in the first round of the playoffs. He's had basically every outcome imaginable, never won. I believe you won 3 leagues this year that we are in together.
That is correct.
So I can no longer use that line, which is very disappointing, but congratulations to you.
Thank you.
This is probably your winningest year ever, right? Huh? 3?
I won 3 college sides, and then I won 2 NFL sides, C2C, and then 1 in a dynasty league. So yeah, probably my winningest league ever. A couple other, playoff sprinkles in there, like a 3rd place or 2, a 2nd place in the C2C versus NIL NFL side. That one hurt. Matt Geiger, if you're watching, that hurt.
I didn't even know I made the championship of that game. I didn't even realize that I was still in this play. So that was a good time. You can use those winnings to maybe go buy a Peloton for your own house, Colin. I recommend it. I'm telling you.
I could use it at the gym at work for free.
Isn't there just something so convenient about going downstairs?
There is.
Hopping on your own Peloton. I don't know.
There is.
Maybe just me. I'm just a snob on my boat, All right. So let's talk about what we learned in 2023. We put that behind us.
Thank you for that shout out.
I actually put a note in my notes app on my phone of stuff I wanted to talk about early on in campus life. And that's the top thing. I was like, I got to congratulate Colin. I got to find a new angle to get you on, but we'll figure it out.
Take it.
It's going to be a long year. So what we learned in 2023 and how we're going to apply it in 2024. I think, there's learning to do every year, but especially the past year or two with the opening of the transfer portal, with the introduction of NIL, all these different things has really changed just, the college football landscape. Not even talking about the fantasy side of things, which is what we do. As a fan, Pitt I'm a huge Pitt fan. We just brought in Eli Holstein. We never would have had Eli Holstein. A chance at that. I'm not really a fan of his, but the pedigree of player would not be coming to Pitt. We've had all these other different kind of movements. So I think it's really kind of been an adjustment period for us for the advice we're giving. I don't think, we've been way off base on what we're saying, but Colin, is there anything that happened this year, a lesson that you feel like we can take away for next year and apply and get a little bit better?
Yeah, I think so. We had said it leading into this year, from the 2022 season, leading into the 2023, that we were going to start treating CFF only players more like a redraft. But if at this transfer portal season has just been so insane, and it just keeps getting crazier and crazier every year, you absolutely have to treat CFF only players like redraft. There's not really any other option anymore. You can't look at, a guy like Caden Salter did end up going back to Liberty, but Caden Salter finishes as a QB3. He's got at least 2 years of eligibility left. You thinking him and Jamie Chadwell's offense going to be a great marriage for the next couple of years. Portal gone.
Well, and you're thinking he's stuck there too, because he's already transferred once. And then they set that new rule that, now maybe we can do second transfers. So,
yeah. So you absolutely have to treat CFF only players like redraft. And while we will be making our rankings, we've updated them. We've done a pretty big overhaul. We'll continue to update them throughout the offseason, but you really can't get a good grasp on that until after spring and seeing how some of these other transfers are going to shake out and how these depth charts are going to shake out. So I think you have to treat them like redraft, and you have to kind of be patient in through the early part of this spring.
Yeah, it definitely is shaking up. Just we've talked about this a ton, I think, in the past, but I really do think, and I think the concept of stashing is getting more and more difficult as well. I think at the end of seasons in the past in a campus to Canton league where, you have your college side, you've got your CFF playoffs, you got players moving on at the end of the year, all that kind of stuff. But you have, some waiver claims at the end of the year. You have this offensive system, maybe Dana Holgerson's quarterback is graduating and they got a guy on the bench, and you're like, okay, I can grab this guy now, be sneaky. He's probably going to be a pretty early draft pick in supplemental drafts next year. But if I pick him up now, that's just, a ton of easy value. And now, Dana Holgerson got fired or whatever, but didn't he, from Houston? I believe he's gone.
Yeah, he's gone. Willie Fritz is in there.
Yes. But, now anything can happen. The starter could stay and could find another year of eligibility. He could leave. They could bring in somebody else. So I think the concept of stashing at the end of the year, I might be less inclined moving forward to save draft picks till the end of the year, like I have in some leagues, where if I have a league where I think I'm okay from a competitive standpoint, I have a good team, or if it's a team that's, weak and I'm, kind of rebuilding real quick, tearing it down. I'm wondering if the year-end save is going to be quite as valuable. Now, you can always just scoop up a guy that kind of breaks out at the end of the year, and we usually do get a couple of those. So you could, conceivably just get ahead of, but even then, that guy could enter the portal. You could have a guy you could have a wide receiver at Houston who breaks out, and then we're like, okay, he's next guy up there. Tank Dell's gone. This guy's stepping in, and then he's in the portal. He flies too close to the sun, goes to USC, doesn't play at all, or something like that. I think the concept of stashing late in the season, I might be doing less of it next year. I have to think about that a little bit, but that's the one adjustment I'm making in relation to that point. Because I think we already were saying, CFF redraft only. If you get more than 1 year out of some of these guys, you're going to be happy, but you can't bank on it.
Right. And you still do have to take eligibility into consideration. Like even with Caden Salter entering the portal, even if he didn't withdraw and he ended up going somewhere else, like you do still have additional years of eligibility. So you do get additional years of CFF production. It may just not be the top tier elite like you were hoping, like you got this year from Liberty. So guys like Marcus Carroll this year, who had a great year at Georgia State, we knew he had another year of eligibility. So that does carry a little bit of weight. Now he transfers to Missouri, and we'll see how that ends up shaking out. But, there's a little bit of value into another year, but you can't bank on repeat production. I think that's another big takeaway for me.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, how are you? Because I've always used returning or like amount of years left as kind of a last tiebreaker if I'm kind of deciding between guys. A lot of these leagues, you get limited waivers, 4 waivers So, you can't just have unlimited ads. Right. I've said, I've got running back A and running back B. They're both in their RB 12 to 16 range this season. One of them's got 2 years left. One of them's got 1 year left. I'll take the guy with 2 years. Now, I'm not even sure what I'm going to use as a tiebreaker on some of this stuff. I mean, I guess you still use it. You still use it with the expectation that, like, Marcus Carroll might be droppable now almost. Because we're going to talk about this in a little bit. Marcus Carroll transferred, like you said, to Missouri. Today, they just got a commitment from Nate Noel from App State. Plus, they've got Kawan Lacey, the very talented true freshman, coming in. Like that, he may not even factor in next year. He might be a depth guy. He might get 60 carries next year. I mean, it's just bonkers. That's how it's, I think, going to work from moving forward here.
Yeah, because they still have Tavoris Jones, my guy, who I was
going to say, I knew you were going to bring
as a freshman. Had some hope for him. He's probably toast now, but he is on the roster. And then I think Nathaniel Pete's back too. I think. I know Schrader's
left
gone
or not. He might still be there. Yeah, Schrader's gone for sure. He's going to the Senior Bowl.
So there's just so many bodies there that we're not going to know how that shakes out. You have to keep paying attention in through spring. So I try to be, cautiously optimistic on Carroll, and then he gets another portal edition. So yeah, I mean, I think you do have to factor it in, and I think you can still use years remaining and eligibility as a tiebreaker, but just with the knowledge that your favorite player could go to any school at any time. And
Chris says in the chat, Tavoris Jones is the skeleton in the chair underwater in the swimming meme. And that was descriptive enough that I think most of you know what they're referring to there.
Yep.
Yeah. So here's a question for you, Colin, and I'm asking you to think out loud on the fly here, which is always a dangerous proposition. That's why we don't do live shows. This question right here is why we don't do live shows.
So much editing behind this.
So much. I cut 2 hours and leave it on the floor every single time we do one of these. Will the uncertainty in terms of future CFF production alter the way that you're drafting, not in startups per se, but maybe supplemental drafts? Because I know in some supplemental drafts, with the way I tend to play C2C, what I try to do is I try to grab, like, if I can get a couple additional, like, first, second, third picks in a league, which is actually, it's really not very difficult in the grand scheme of things. I have a league I won this year, and I managed to flip up for the 101 and the 201 in this league. Like, you can definitely do it if you're working on it. You could kind of hit a couple of, you could like those Debbie guys early, and then when round 3 rolls around, you could take, the top CFF guy that it looks like that's still sitting in the pool from last year. And you can kind of snag those obvious guys, so you're not necessarily guessing with some of those later picks. Will that change how you're viewing that? Because now you might not even get, let's say Torrey Horton was sitting there after, that freshman year where he kind of played well, and then he transferred to Colorado State, followed Mike Norvell over there. Is that Mike? No, it's not Mike, is it? It's
Jay.
Thank you. Would you still be super interested in taking him in the second, thinking that maybe he tries to transfer up again if he has another big season?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would. And the CFF production is a lot more hazy for the future. You kind of have to look at it through more of a 1 year window. But I think we're also seeing so much transferring from these like mid to high 4-star guys, especially at the quarterback position. There's so much transferring from other players too at bigger schools. Dante Moore going from UCLA to Oregon. Now that kind of renders Austin Novosad, a guy that I was targeting in the, probably like 5-6 round range. And now he's basically, I don't want to say useless, but he's got to transfer to go somewhere else because they brought in 2 other quarterbacks ahead of him, and you kind of look at this, a couple of different players that way too. Kenny Minchie, another one, Jaden Rashada, Sam Levitt. We'll talk about that situation a little bit later, but all of this movement is also impacting these freshmen. So it's kind of just making everything a lot more ambiguous. So it does impact, like, the movement for CFF production does impact how I'm looking at the probably like rounds 3-ish range, 3, 4, 5, but so does the transferring for the freshmen. So I am still looking at CFF production probably in that range. It's just a little bit less, down the road, where if I'm looking in, let's say Cody Schrader was available there and I knew he was coming back, but he only had 1 year left, I would still take him pretty high because we knew the production you feel good about the production you're going to get this year is going to be borderline elite.
I do think, I don't want to say that it's all downside and no upside to the transfer portal and kind of this freer market in terms of player movement. Because I do think it can, like if your draft mantra is I am just trying to draft talent, and not just say, I'm not saying you're one of those people that's just drafting Devi, because we've talked about that a lot on this show. If you're just drafting players solely on the college side as a look ahead to the NFL, that's your only goal. You care nothing about competing on the college side. You're probably missing out on a lot of value in the long run. We talk about that all the time. But I do think if you're drafting stat or, kind of later round guys as like, this is just a really good quarterback, and even if he gets transferred over, he can probably go somewhere else and play and be pretty good. We haven't had a ton of instances of that yet, but I think we will start getting more here over the next couple of years as we kind of see some of this. I think there will be some trickle down, type impact for some of these smaller schools. So I think even though we haven't necessarily, at least a quarterback, seen a ton of it yet, we've seen it at some other positions. I think we're going to see it with Dante Dowdle, for example, this year, leaving Oregon, going to Nebraska. I think he's an example of a guy that like kind of, figured it out quickly. Like this is not going exactly how I anticipated it. I think getting some guys to do that could end up working out really, really well as well. So instead of maybe, you're late in a supplemental draft and you're targeting freshmen, instead of saying, this guy's a little more talented, but he's going to Alabama. Like, is he ever going to play at Alabama? Or you're saying, this guy's, he's okay, but he's going to Syracuse and their running back only has a year left. Maybe now I start leaning a little more toward the Alabama guy or, LSU or whatever, because there is some, chance of runoff into another program that could end up being pretty positive for us overall.
Yeah, succession plans are kind of going out the window. So I do think that's a good approach, where just draft more based on talent. And again, not like you said, not just the Devi talent, because you do miss out on a lot of value there. If nothing else, to flip some CFF valuable players into Devi assets, even if that is more of your focus, but focus on talent overall. And a guy like Thomas Castellanos, not a guy that we really saw as an NFL guy, but we're like, this guy could be really good for CFF if he's given a chance. And he got a chance and he was. So you can still look at guys like that. They're like, probably not an NFL guy, but if he gets in the right system, this guy could be really good for fantasy. I think I'm probably a little bit more likely to take a guy like that than a guy where I'm like, for your example, using the running back at Syracuse, like their running back has 1 year left. He could step in and into that system and he could be really good, but I don't think he's that great of a player. It's more the system. I'm probably passing on that type of player a little bit more often for the Thomas Castellanos super high ceiling, if he can get on the field type of thing.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see. I wouldn't like another year to kind of see how some of the situations start shaking out. For instance, I have a league a couple of years ago in the startup. It was a 28-teamer. And I was like, I'm very clearly like, the edge is not drafting for this year in those kinds of leagues, in my opinion. The edge is like, let's look to year 2 and figure it out. And so I targeted in that league a guy like LaQuint Allen, who was at Syracuse. I was like, I think he probably steps in for Sean Tucker. I took Jonah Coleman. I said, I think he steps in. I took Ollie Gordon in that draft. I said, I think he steps in at Oklahoma State. I took Ashton Genty because I was like, I think he steps in for Helani. That team was a buzzsaw last year, but I'm not sure that'll work in a year or two.
Yeah,
It very well may be the case where I take those 4 guys. Syracuse goes and gets the 3rd Georgia running back out of the portal. And then Arizona goes out and gets a USC cast off out of the portal and, insert other guy here. And all of a sudden I'm sitting here with 4 guys that are not going to be anything at their school. And I chose them. I really liked Ollie Gordon, but the other guys, I was like, I think the situation here is what I'm drafting, the succession plan, as you mentioned. So I think that's going to be something to watch for sure. But I think, in terms of where maybe I'd used clear path to playing time in year 2 as a tiebreaker before, maybe now I'm saying, okay, like, is this guy, like, how much better or worse is this guy? And do I think like there could be a shift there? That might be I don't want to do it every circumstance,
right?
But I think there's certainly going to be spots to pick there for that.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
All right, Colin, you put be patient on waivers on here. And I know I just said I'm probably not going to wait till the end of the year now to use my waiver claims, but I think there's there's a lot of room between
Yes.
burn all your waivers in week 1 and let's save some for the end of the year, which might not be a thing that's necessarily super effective anymore.
Yeah. So this year, for me, I was aggressive on waivers early. I ended up, it worked out in some instances where I picked up guys like a Caden Salter who was floating out there in a waivers, like a TJ Finley. So that worked out in those situations. But then it also definitely did not work out in several others. I got a lot of Gage Larvadane, who he ended up getting hurt. I spent a lot of fob on him and I got like a week or 2 out of him. Guys like Pafeli Ashlock too, he was fine, but he didn't end up being like that star that we were kind of hoping for. So there's some examples there where it's successful. There's some examples where it's not. So I just want to, use maybe 1 or 2 waivers early on in the year, take a couple of guys that I think will be good, and then wait a little bit longer and take some of these guys that kind of break out a little later in the year. I also think there's a little less competition at that time of year too, because people do kind of burn through their waivers earlier in the year.
Yeah, I gotta say, I think this was actually the rare year. And if listeners feel free to chime in here in the chat of examples where I'm totally wrong. I think this was the rare year where almost all of the early season kind of like burn 80% targets. I think most of them ended up being pretty good throughout the season, which is unusual. I think Ashlock is really the only one that I picked up a few pieces of that really burned me. I think everybody else, those quarterbacks, like you mentioned, Finley especially, I think was a guy that I targeted really heavily. I talked about him a ton early on the NIL only show that I do on waivers. Trying to think of some other guys that I had snagged.
Marcus Carroll
early. Yeah, Carroll was amazing. And he was actually a guy that I passed on. I was like, I don't really know if this is going to be sustainable or not. But yeah, I mean, I think this was a rare year where you probably didn't get burned too much. Don't get too confident on that. Don't, you're a little high on that success right now. Be careful. I think that's good advice there, Colin. Anything else that we learned in 2023? Anything like specifically like different teams? I don't have anything super team specific overall. I mean, it's getting harder and harder to trust Georgia players. But other than that, I don't have a lot to really complain about from 2023. It was a mostly straightforward year overall. I really feel like.
Yeah, I think so too. And then we'll have to look at 2024, where we're having some conference realignments, like maybe some teams and some systems will take a little bit of time to adjust. Like we're going to see new starting quarterbacks at all of the teams moving from the SEC or the Pac-12 into the Big Ten, except for maybe Ethan Garber's at UCLA, but we don't really care that much about them. But
he was kind of decent at points last year. I don't know. That might be the most surprising quarterback performance for me of the year.
That's fair.
Was like Ethan Garber's being like better than I thought he would be.
Yeah, but the teams that are transitioning, I think we'll have to kind of keep an eye on them, and it might take a little bit to adjust because I think very different stylistically from Pac-12 to Big Ten. So something worth keeping an eye on.
Are you fading some of those offenses this year, Colin? Real quick.
I'm gonna make you
decide now.
I'm definitely fading Washington at cost. I think people are going to be really hyping up some of these guys like Jeremy Bernard. Anywhere I don't already have him.
Yeah,
I don't know if I'm going to be willing to spend up on him. Will Rogers, not a guy that I'm going to be looking to spend up at for what people are going to kind of look for.
So real quick on that, we're actually, so the very last piece of this, because this podcast comes out Monday night, like late Monday night. Yes. We actually are going to cover like just a very quick national championship game preview since at the very end of this. If Washington looks good in that game and wins it, or like, it's a good game and they lose, it's 35-31. They put up 31 on Michigan. Would that change your mind at all? I know those guys are leaving, but kind of Kalen DeBoer we trust type deal.
Look, I do really trust Kalen DeBoer, and I think that offense is still going to be good next year. I just don't. I think people, it's gotten to the national stage. Kalen DeBoer has a lot of hype, so you're not going to be able to get much value this year. And I think there's just enough uncertainty there, but with the new pieces stepping in, presumably, that I'm going to be a little more cautious on it. Again, I already have a lot of Jeremy Bernard. I have Austin Mack if he ends up starting at any point in time during the year. We'll see. I don't, probably lower likelihood, but I have some pieces, but I'm just not going to be buying more of them.
I kind of wish a less on the radar transfer had gone in there than Jeremiah Hunter, because I actually think Hunter might still be one of my biggest offseason targets, especially like let's assume here they lose Jalen Polk, Jalen McMillan, and Roma Dunze. He might be a guy that I'm targeting. I know they have some other interesting players there. You like Boston.
Denzel Boston.
We both like Jeremy Bernard. There's another kid there that's played a little bit this year, right?
Giles Jackson.
Yes, Giles Jackson.
I don't know how much eligibility he has left because I know he came from Michigan. So that's just, I don't know.
I actually don't know that either. I assumed he had more time, but maybe he doesn't.
He might.
Regardless, I mean, those are the kind of guys I think will be interesting in terms of targeting. And I'm curious because I think it could be the opposite. I think there could be a little bit of the stars left. We're not assuming similar production for the guys that come in, and maybe we get it because Will Rogers. I didn't want to get this granular on this discussion, but Will Rogers has experience in a pass-heavy offense and kind of a rhythm offense and an offense that you're kind of, it's a lot of timing and just kind of putting the ball on a spot and expecting your guy to be there. I think DeBoer's offense has a lot of that. So I think that marriage is actually really, really good. And I am pretty hopeful for a lot of their wide receivers there next year, quite frankly, but who knows?
Yeah. We don't want to get too granular with that. We can hit a little bit more on that at the national championship preview.
Can you be honest with me for a sec, Colin?
Always.
Is that the first time you've ever used the word granular?
Not the first time, but it's not a common word I use.
Okay. I wish
there's
we had a way to see how many times we've ever said like a word.
Yeah. There's a couple words that I'll use that I'm like, this is a word I can use and it sounds really good. It makes me sound smart. Like impetus. I use impetus a lot.
That doesn't shock me. That doesn't shock me. All right. Before we get into more granular news items, kind of some specifics as to why we're adjusting. And again, if you're listening in here, please feel free to drop some news items that you want us to discuss. And we'll be honest, if we said, we haven't adjusted our rankings for that yet, we don't really know. I haven't thought about it. We'll let you guys know. All right. Building rankings to start the new year. So Colin, I think we can talk about kind of our processes and just how, let's give some information to the listeners so they're not just counting on us to kind of spoon feed them a set of rankings, because I think
we're a big teach you to fish kind of podcast.
And that's why we have all the tools and everything, so you can go and do the research yourself, or you can listen to us talk about whatever the tools spit out as we were looking at it every week on Campus Life here. So Colin, why don't we start with you? As the year starts rolling on over here and you start taking out the rookies and things like that, how are you kind of starting to build the base of your rankings? And what do you rank at the site? You do C2C and Devi or just C2C?
Yeah, I do both C2C and Devi. And I will say I got a little overzealous on my Devi rankings and removed some of the guys that I was pretty sure are going to declare or have already declared. Even though you said don't do that, I already did it. So that's
not surprising at all. It's not surprising. What was the impetus for that, Colin?
Not having to do it later.
Oh, okay.
But for C2C, we'll start there. And I do it for Devi too, but for C2C, I do a total reset. I have a completely separate sheet that I have. It's titled Rankings Updates. And I will just take all of my players and add them in there in one column. And then I have a couple other columns where they're buckets to say. So, the first one is a high-end Devi asset and a high-end CFF producer. So guys that from last year would have been like Caleb Williams, Marvin Harrison Jr. I did not put Drake May in there because I did not think he was going to be I wasn't confident in him being a high-end CFF asset. These have to.
What did he finish at?
I don't have it off the top of my head.
It was good enough that I definitely started him some weeks. Yeah.
Yes, he was definitely solid. But so I have a bucket like that. Then I have a bucket for guys who I think have good Devi potential and will be a CFF starter. This year, guys that I have, and I do this by position as well. So guys in that good Devi potential and CFF starter that I have right now are I have no quarterbacks in that first column, but I have guys like Connor Wigman in there. I have guys like Nico, Jackson Arnold, Jackson Dart in that bucket. Guys that I can see some NFL future for them, but I'm very confident I'm going to have some CFF starting ability. And then I kind of work my way down from there, scaling in buckets. And I put all the players in buckets. And then once I have them in a bucket, then I start ranking within that. Then I put them all back into one big column.
I didn't look to see. Do you know how many players you have ranked right now, Colin, in your C2C data set?
Total at all positions?
No. Let's do. How many quarterbacks do you have ranked?
I have 108 quarterbacks ranked.
Okay, I'm pretty close to that. I have 109, and I actually have Miller Moss sitting down at the end that I haven't ranked yet because he was not previously ranked for me. Didn't think he'd be the guy there. Okay, how many running backs do you have ranked total?
And we're still talking C2C, right? Not Devi.
Yep.
I have 123.
Okay, I have 149. How many receivers you got?
157.
Okay, I got 180. So you're keeping your ranking sets pretty tight. Tight end?
I'm going to expand mine a little bit more.
That was going to be my next question. Do you pare the list down to start? I mean, obviously you're taking out rookies, but at the end of the year, let's say let me go to the bottom of my running backs. Okay, I've got Trey Hawley as my last running back at LSU. He was a true freshman last year, I believe. Didn't really do anything.
Okay.
I kind of doubt he ever really factors in there, even with kind of some of the departures there. It seems like they're going in a different direction there. Mm-hmm. Would you remove Trey Hawley? Would you remove?
I did.
Okay. Gabe Irvin is at the bottom of mine. Should I trim? Do you contract and then expand? Do you expand, then worry about contraction later? How do you kind of deal with that?
I contract and then expand. So like I said, I take the list of everybody that I had ranked previously and I put it over in a column and I start looking through. I'm like, all right, this guy's off to the NFL. Get rid of him. Contract. This guy going to be completely worthless. Get him out of here. Guys,
I'm sure that person has feelings and has worth to somebody, Colin. So let's be a little more careful with
our fantasy for
generalization. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Worthless for fantasy.
Thank you.
Not a player that I want on my roster. So I'll get rid of those guys. I'll trim that down. And then, because there's always names in CFF that pop up that I'm not aware of. And we have a great CFF team. They're always, I think they're getting started on their rankings for 2024 here soon as well. They're constantly talking in the chat about guys that could pop up, guys that they like. So I will take those and then I'll start adding those in, so I will contract what I had and then add in more input from other places, other people.
I like that. So my process, I contract and then expand as well. So I think I agree with that approach. I think it keeps you, it cuts bloat. Like you really you don't ever at any time, like I try to keep my C2C rankings and my slightly less extent on my Devi rankings because I never quite know how deep people's Devi leagues are going to go. Mm-hmm. I know like that pinnacle of Devi goes to like 100 rounds deep every year or whatever. Like, it's like there's leagues out there like that. I try not to go. So I try to keep the Devi pretty deep, but I try to keep C2C as like just guys that I would want to roster. If I have no interest in ever rostering a player, I don't put them in my rankings, even if, they were a 4-star receiver last year and they're still sitting on the bench at Bama somewhere. Like if I just have no interest, I have no interest. Trey Hawley is a great example there. 4-star last year. I'm removing him. I doubt he ever comes back into my rankings. I'm trying to think. Let me look at my wide receivers because that might be an easier one. At this point, I probably don't care about rostering Jaden Bray anymore. I'll probably the Oklahoma State wide receiver going into his third year. I'll probably delete him out. A guy like Darius Clemens at Michigan, who was kind of got a little bit of buzz a couple years ago, really athletic guy, hasn't done anything. I probably don't care. I probably don't want to roster him at all. Caden Saunders at Penn State, I probably don't care to roster Caden Saunders at all. Probably cutting him out.
Wouldn't blame
So I'll go through and do all of that. My process, I've changed it over the past couple of years to match what we're doing here at Campus Canton. And for anybody that's, I'm sure a lot of the folks listening are people that are in our Discord or regular listeners to the show. And we're just so blown away by the fact that we're doing a live show, which we actually get asked to do quite often. And we're always I don't really, at least not regularly. We're not willing to go there. But if you're, just someone who's found our YouTube channel and has enjoyed listening to us talk about, whatever, probably Felix and Matt were your gateway in. our kind of how the order of how we produce things at campus to camp throughout the year goes. So we do the rankings overhaul at the end of January. March 1st, we release our final rankings for the freshmen for the year. We don't alter them at all after February 28th or in certain years, February 29th, presumably. Pesky leap days in that.
Yep.
We don't change our rankings at all after that within like the actual freshman rankings. We don't go in anymore. Just like the services
The
after
recruiting
signing.
ones.
Yes. Just like after signing day, where I believe the services that or early signing day, maybe I think is when they lock it. That we lock our rankings. We don't change them anymore. So we don't update the purely recruiting rankings at all based on spring news at all. Because we want to give a kind of a view into what we were looking at just purely based on the player. Now, obviously, if you go into our other ranking sets and a player, I'm trying to think of a guy last year that Carnell Tate was a guy that raised up mine several spots last year because, I think he was my wide receiver 6, ended up being my wide receiver 3 in the class by the time May rolled around because he just crushed Ohio State's practices so much. I couldn't ignore that, but I did not go into the recruiting rankings and change those locked. And the reason we don't change those beyond that is because we release our freshman and supplemental guide that day. And for those that play in campus to Canton leagues, every year, much like a dynasty fantasy league where you have your rookie draft every year, well, our rookies are already basically all owned. The rookie draft's a joke in campus to Canton leagues for the most part. Sometimes you get a Trey Lance or something in there.
Isaiah Pacheco.
Was he available? I guess he was probably available a lot.
Probably most. Didn't really roster Rutgers running backs.
That's true. Maybe Mongenai or whatever is the next guy there. Had a nice bowl game there against Miami. So we released that guide. It's all freshmen. It's our top. I believe the last year we did it was we had 180 players to simulate the 15-ish or so rounds of a 12-team league that you usually have. 150 freshmen, top 30 non-freshmen that are probably available in your leagues. We released that March 1st. So in the process of the build up for that, I am grading freshmen like a mofo. That's all I do. I'm at like 180, I think right now. I'm just grading freshmen, getting them all ranked, getting them all sorted, getting them all tiered up so that I kind of have an idea of like the Devi value of those players. Cause really it's kind of hard, as we were just talking about, to project some of these CFF forward kind of players. Once I have those lists, our Devi guide comes out May 1st. I help write the Devi guide. So I ship into Devi mode. I watch a ton of players. I get those Devi rankings built out. And then I use the Devi rankings and the freshman rankings as the basis for my full C2C rankings at that point. Completely overhaul. And then I go into our CFF rankings, which I do not help produce at all. I never claim to be an expert on CFF. In fact, I give that disclaimer pretty much every time we talk on a show. Go ahead, go into their rankings. Look at the players that they have that I don't have in either of my ranking sets at all. Guys that we think are quote unquote CFF only. They don't have NFL value. They're just there to score you college fantasy points. And I kind of true up, okay, we think this guy's going to be the wide receiver 3 in CFF this year as a company. What's the value of that compared to a Devi player or a freshman or something like that? And then I go in and slot those guys in. And that's how I build my final kind of set of rankings that will then, then I start making adjustments, a couple spots here, a couple spots there. This guy's breaking out and all that kind of stuff. But that is as the year goes on, kind of how I build mine. For the next couple of weeks, probably through the end of February, it will basically just, my rankings will be the players that are leaving out, the players that I think are not good out, and then kind of sift and sort if there were any kind of adjustments based on the transfer portal so far. So that's kind of what I do. But I like, just because of what all the stuff that we produce here at C2C, kind of how I follow through so that I can contribute all my different areas.
Yeah, I think that's fair. It sounds like we have a pretty similar process overall. I don't follow like the timeline of like how we release things with freshmen. I'm also not somebody who ranks freshmen for recruiting rankings at the site. So I lean a lot on you guys for that. So I do wait till that's kind of finalized. I'll watch, probably the top 15 or so quarterbacks, 15 to 20 quarterbacks, the top, 40-ish wide receivers, 30, 40, same at running back, 30, 40, maybe 5 to 8 tight ends. So I don't go it nearly as deep as you guys do in that. So my freshmen kind of filter in as I go. But I usually have mine, I've a little bit more Devi focused first.
Yeah, I don't blame you. And I think the reason why I kind of follow that is because I think every year I get into the Debbie guide, and it's really easy for us to talk all year about, a couple years ago, like Byron Cardwell was a hot Debbie name. Everyone was like, "Oh, you would go buy Byron Cardwell," and he didn't really break out last year, but he's going to next year. I promise I didn't choose this name as a shot at you, Colin. And then I was like, okay, yeah. I mean, he produced reasonably well in the carries he got here. That's all. It could be an ascending offense. And I got assigned Byron Cardwell for the Debbie guide, so I went and watched Byron Cardwell, and I came away so unimpressed, just blown. I was like, the footwork is awful. It's lazy. Contact balance is not very good. Like this is not a well-rounded player. And he did get injured but he transferred to Cal this year, did nothing. Like I just, you get some of those guys where you're like, okay, I can follow along with what's going on here. I'm looking at the depth chart. I'm looking at the stats. Maybe I caught an Oregon game last year and he looked okay as I was just watching it. Yeah. And then you sit down and actually watch some of these guys. And that happens maybe 8 to 10 guys every year that I totally either sour on or flip my opinion the other way. I'm like, oh, I kind of thought this guy stunk because he's at, I don't know. No offense, Oregon State fans, but like I don't think of you guys as like a premier Debbie hotspot. Say, the wide receiver at Oregon State, whatever, and you sit down and watch a guy and you say, oh, this guy's actually pretty good. So I think that the Debbie guide for me is really centers my opinion on a lot of these guys, and I can't watch everybody that we put in the Debbie guide, but I can watch my guys, and then I can watch maybe Corey Pereira, our lead Debbie guy, says I'm struggling on my opinion on Amari and Hampton. So, pop on Amari Hampton for a couple minutes just to say like, oh, okay, yeah, I like him, or he kind of stinks. I think it's a fun process. I think it really helps kind of hone in my rankings. I don't know what I would do if I didn't contribute on all these different guys in terms of just process wise.
Yeah, I agree. Like it definitely is helpful for like refining the processes and stuff or refining your rankings. And I do find some guys throughout the process as I'm writing for the Debbie guide or freshman guide where I'm like, not as big of a fan as this guy as I thought I was going to be.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So let's talk about some more specific items that have probably impacted our rankings here this year. I wrote down 1, 2, 3, 4. I wrote down 7. You wrote down 5. There's a lot more.
Yeah.
But we can't get to all of them. And we did get some questions in our Discord as well. So I don't want to, just talk about, these and not talk about anything else. But I think let's start with Quinshon Judkins, which I believe happened after you would have recorded the last show. So you have not talked about Quinshon Judkins on this show at all.
Correct.
Correct. Okay. Ole Miss running back entered the portal. There's been some really weird news stories. Like he said, she said, he was a malcontent. He wants more money. He just, isn't feeling at Ole Miss anymore, or whatever angle you could probably get an article from. We've gotten a story on it. But Quinshon Judkins is in the portal, some rumors about where he's going to land. I don't think there's anything concrete enough for us to say how it impacts Judkins per se, but it has really impacted, I think, like a guy like Kedrick Riscana, who I possibly would have dropped a couple of spots with Judkins staying there and not looking like they really want to rotate.
Him. Yeah.
Oh, did you? Did you put him back up?
I haven't yet. I still need to look at that, and I will move him back up though for sure.
Riscana was a true freshman last year, a guy that I really liked. I don't want to speak for Colin, but I think as a company, we liked him a pretty good amount. Didn't play a ton last year. Really well-rounded, over 200 pounds, had like over 100 receptions in his high school career, I believe. Very, very, very productive. Good player. So I think, assuming they don't dip into the portal again here, and we're kind of getting toward the end of the roulette. I'm not sure how many there's players that are left to bring in. A guy like Riscano might have dropped down to maybe the 30s, the 40s for me, and he's staying. After I remove all these players, probably top 15, and that might seem a little, rich, but I believe in the talent, and I think as we've seen, if they believe in a guy there, he's getting the carries.
Yeah, no, I think that I definitely will need to bring him back up. I don't know if he'll hit top 15 for me, but I would imagine he'd be in my top 25.
Yeah, just looking at mine real quick right now, without having removed anybody, he's at 18. So yeah, he'll move up.
All right. Not that there's a ton of guys ahead of him that are moving on to the NFL, I'm sure.
Travion, we don't know what he's doing yet. Was presumed he leaves. Braylon Allen, I have in front of him. Jonathan Brooks, and Trey Benson. Those are the NFL guys ahead of him. So not a ton.
So you're looking at 15, maybe 14.
Yeah,
just from
pretty
removing
much.
guys.
Pretty much. Yeah. Malachi Nelson to Boise State, I think, is noteworthy. It's good, bad, indifferent. How's this
I think with the ability now of players to transfer twice, but there's basically no, you can only
which I do just want to say we need to be careful with that assumption, because that is still going through the court system. And while I think that it will probably stick, that is not a guarantee. So I just think we need to be a little bit careful with that assumption before. But just to
that's fair.
It's dangerous.
No, that's fair. But I think going to Boise State, that's a place where he will be guaranteed to start. I don't see them bringing him in to not start there. Now, there's a couple other places that are a little bit bigger that I think he also would have started at, like Miami. I think had he gone to Miami, they've whiffed on so many quarterbacks in this portal that it would have been him and Emory Williams, and it probably would have been Malachi Nelson.
I think now. Are you shocked they didn't open the bag for him? Because they sound like they were trying to desperately with some guys.
I am pretty shocked at that. Auburn. He could have gone to Auburn, and he could have been a good CFF quarterback there, and then he's in the SEC. So there are better landing spots that I think he could have still started right away. But the benefit of Boise is he's going to start, and he's going to get some experience. Then you just got to kind of hope he goes and takes that year, looks good, and then goes somewhere else to another big program that will be looking for a quarterback. Maybe at that point, Ohio State might still need a quarterback, after Will Howard leaves. Who knows what that's going to look like. A couple other schools, I'm sure. So it's a stock down for me from where we had him before. He's
not Lincoln Riley's quarterback. Yeah,
exactly. It's hard. He couldn't have moved up, but he didn't plummet. We'll put it that way. In C2C rankings, dropped probably a little further in Devi than I think in C2C.
Yeah. So what you're about to hear from me is going to be between 30 seconds and 2 minutes of absolute cope. No, I think I have a fair path on Malachi Nelson right now. Yes, Malachi Nelson was my top quarterback in last year's class. And I think if you had to ask me, would I take him first of all the freshmen today? My answer would be no. My counterpoint would also be that I generally try to trade my freshmen away during their freshman year if they're at heights, because you can get quite a bit for them, as we've discussed many times on the show. So that's neither here nor there. I think I think he made it very clear when he was going into the portal he couldn't really play at the level he wanted to last year. He's come back from the shoulder injury, basically didn't participate at all in spring. And it sounds like, based on some of the things Lincoln Riley has said, that he just wasn't quite there through the season. So they didn't get to see the full, whatever of him. Trying to dip into the portal, they had Miller Moss, etc. I think kind of, he didn't want to sit another year. So I think it's obvious when he hopped in the portal that he was looking to go play next year. The problem is he waited until the portal had been open for 2 weeks, or, everyone else was announcing they were going to go in. That deals had already been made pretty much anywhere that you could go. That would have been like a preferred landing spot.
Mm-hmm. Washington, Oregon, lots of places. Yeah.
A ton of places. Yeah. I think that basically all of those were gone. So at that point, because everyone was like, well, look at these offers he's getting. They're just not very good. Offers are always self-reported, and I'm pretty sure he just made it very clear that he wasn't going to go somewhere and sit for another year. I think it's just pretty obvious that is exactly what was happening, personally. So I think he's going to a place, Boise, completely open. They don't have anything there. Taylor Green left. He's going to start day one. If he's bad, we'll know it early, which I actually think is great. But if he's pretty good, he either, honestly, I think you could get drafted day one from Boise State.
I wouldn't rule that out. Yeah.
We haven't seen a quarterback do it yet. And we've seen a lot more of their guys kind of go round 2 is maybe a ceiling. But if he's good, if he's, the borderline 4 or 5-star quarterback, he can get drafted day one there. And if he wants to leave, then I'm sure, like you said, there's going to be plenty of other places that have opportunities for him to go to. So it's not a positive for his value. I'm going to probably drop him a couple of spots, but I've seen people just nuking him, and I'm like, why? I didn't even see the kid play yet.
Yeah. That's where I'm at too.
I'm going to buy him depending on value this year. A lot, probably, in my leagues.
Yeah. I would consider him probably a buy right now as well, but he was also my QB1. So I was very high on him as a talent. And I do agree with you that, he wanted to go somewhere where he was going to play right away. So when we were hearing these offers, he was looking at Cal, he was looking at Houston, Tulane, some Duke was
I
maybe on the
remember if
list
Duke was. I don't remember.
until they got Malachi or Malik Murphy. I'm not sure, but either way, like they were all places that like very clearly he was going to start right away. But you can't tell me that some other places didn't contact him, but he reported the ones that he wanted to go to, and he wants to start. And we haven't seen him at all. So I am just operating on the same assumption that he is still the talent that I thought he was before. He's kind of Schrodinger's quarterback right now.
I will say, if you're on the opposite side of that, this is a great time to find somebody like us in your league who is kind of, still treating him as like the positive mystery box and selling him for that value, as opposed to if we do get a couple of games out of him and he's not very good, then it's going to be really hard to sell him, I think. So it's really just going to be depending on cost for people. But I think he's a guy that if you have some league mates that are high on him, I'd be very comfortable selling him. But if I can find a desperate person in our home C2C league that we did this year, one of our friends drafted Malachi really early and has been tilting a little bit in our group chat. I might try to buy from him. We'll see how that goes. But I mentioned earlier Dante Dowdle to Nebraska. I think that's a really interesting one. The former 4-star running back from Oregon to Nebraska, who I think they need talent everywhere. I think they had a good start this offseason with obviously flipping Dylan Raiola. We talked about that a lot. You talked about it with the guys when they came on for the recruiting recap. We talked about it live on early signing day quite a bit. But they brought him in. They're trying to bulk up the receiver room. There weren't a lot of options, so I think they've kind of done the best what they can there. We'll see how that goes. And then they really didn't have anything at running back that was interesting either. Dowdle was not terrible this year at Oregon, but I think he's very clearly worse than Jordan James, than probably Jaden Lamar, who got, I think, a little more run than him, or at least they prefer in certain situations to use him. And then Noah Whittington's the other kid, and I believe he announced that he's coming back. So another year sitting on the bench, or he can go to Nebraska. I think this is a match made in heaven. Dowdle was a guy that I was not high on at all last year, and I'm still not. Like I think his ceiling is like a guy that goes to the NFL, gets drafted in the 5th round, and could own a backfield in the NFL for a year or two, and you get some value out of him. Like there's so many running backs that fit in that category. It's the kind of player he is. But I think now getting some CFF value out of him, whereas I thought there was basically none for at least another year or two at Oregon, I think this is a great spot. And I think I haven't adjusted him up yet, but just looking at my rankings, I mean, why would I put him any lower than I have like some like uncertain guys in the low 30s, like Quentin Joyner at USC, who could take over that backfield, true freshman last year. I've got Donovan Edwards in there from Michigan. I've got Jeremiah Love, the Notre Dame back in there, LJ Martin at BYU. Why would I put him much lower than I would put him right in that group? I might prefer him to any of those guys because, Love doesn't really have a 3-down skill set. Edwards has proven he doesn't either. Martin, I kind of said last year, I thought a little bit of what he was doing was a little fool's gold. Dowdle, I think can slot right in there as a guy that like, yeah, okay, whatever the NFL upside is, I'm not sure, probably, average, but CFF wise, he could be pretty good there.
Yeah, I would agree with that. He's definitely a guy that, with this move to Nebraska is going to raise up my rankings because I wasn't the biggest fan of him either. And, I have Jordan James ranked pretty highly because I think he's going to do really well at Oregon this year for CFF purposes. Bucky Irving was good, and Jordan James was used already as the goal line back. So I think, he's going to have that locked up. So I think he's going to have a good year at Oregon for CFF. I think he's going to have, some solid Devy potential there as well. So Dowdle getting out of town is only going to be good for him. And like you said, Nebraska was a place that's looking for talent, just in general talent. There was pretty talent devoid when Matt Rule took over. I think he's done a pretty admirable job so far of building it up, in his time that he's been there so far. So yeah, I think he's going to have some CFF production. I would probably slot him in the same range where I have Marcus Cooper, Jalen Buckley, Parker Jenkins, probably a little bit higher than those guys because I think Dowdle could make an NFL roster. Where these guys, I would be very surprised if they did. Maybe Jenkins, but
I was gonna
slotting
say
him in
Jenkins.
that
I think
range,
Jenkins
yeah,
probably could.
yeah. So slotting in that range, but that's like my mid 40s. So that's probably about where I would end up with them.
Yeah, I don't think it's a bad spot at all. And as we've talked about last year, really, and then going into this year, the running back position for CFF is pretty deep. But in terms of guys that we think are very projectable NFL players, maybe not so much. Carson Steele, speaking of NFL guys projectable to the NFL, this is going to be a really interesting one. Steele goes to the NFL. At this point, dead to us on this show. We ain't talking about him. That's not what we do. But now does that leave the path open for TJ Harden to come in there? Is that where you're angling here, Colin?
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm angling with this one. With Carson Steele gone, TJ Harden looked very good in that bowl game. He looked good in limited work before heading into this year. Before Carson Steele ended up at UCLA, we thought, okay, this TJ Harden could be the next guy up there. I think archetype wise, he is similar to Zach Charbonnet, where he's a little bit bigger. He's more of a straight line guy, not a ton of wiggle, but he's got a little bit of power behind him too. I think he fits well in Chip Kelly's system, and there's not really anybody left in the portal for UCLA to go get. So I have TJ Harden ranked pretty highly right now. I have him as my RB. I have to move Caleb Jackson ahead of him for sure. Now I had them right next to each other.
That I have them like 40
Jackson
spots
needs
apart, so that's wild.
Jackson needs to take a pretty big jump up my rankings right now, honestly. But I have TJ Harden as my RB 18 right now. So I think he's in line for a very nice workload at UCLA. And I see some sort of an NFL future there. Now, we've talked about this before where NFL running backs are a dime a dozen and it's really just whoever's starting. It could plug in for some production here or there. But I think he'll be on an NFL roster, and I think he'll be a really good CFF back next year. So Carson Steele getting out of town, big stock up for me for TJ Harden.
I am a little unsure how you quite get that high. So I'm just going to toss out some names. Obviously, I have him as my RB 44 right now, Harden, but I haven't really adjusted for the Steele news yet. But I'm just going to name off some guys that are in front of him for me that I'm curious where you have, because I think they are more interesting players than what Harden provides from just a pure skill set perspective. So Jade Knott at Cal, I have him 13 spots higher right now.
I am not really sure what that offense is going to look like next year. Spavital's gone. They bring in Chandler Rogers. So I am a little bit lower on Ott. I have Ott as my RB 26.
Okay. Gavin Sawchuk looked pretty good in the bowl game. That room has cleared out a little bit. I think that if I had to guess for next year, the Sawchuk Tatum show, potentially. Some other guys maybe cycle in.
Yeah, I actually was just looking at that, and Sawchuk was another guy that was probably a little bit too low. He was kind of in that same cluster with Harden, but I just moved Sawchuk ahead of him. So that bumped Harden down one spot and Sawchuk in at my RB 18.
Amari and Hampton at UNC.
He is actually my RB 11 right now.
Oh, snap. Okay. That was a lot richer than I expected you to say. All right. How about let's get into some more uncertain guys then. What about Ruben Owens? Where do you have Ruben Owens?
I have Ruben Owens RB 17.
Okay.
So I think he's going to step in and be the lead running back there.
So where
with the new offensive talent coming in.
I'm so good. Jamaria Miller, you're probably pretty low on Jam.
No, I have Jam as my RB 16.
I'm so confused. The players that you have in here. Do you have Genty Gordon in there? LaQuinn Allen, Darius Taylor?
Allen, or I have Ashton Jeanty at 12, Gordon at 13. Who else did you say? LaQuinn Allen?
Yeah.
I don't necessarily know what. Yeah, I don't know what that offense is going to look like for Allen next year. So I have Allen at 28. Darius Taylor I have at 25.
Okay. I know some of these guys that I have in this range right now. Marshawn Lloyd's gone, Corum, Rasheen Ali. Let's see which happens with Chase
See,
McClellan.
I also said I've moved some guys out.
Yeah, I'm sitting here like the math is not mathing here. Dallin Hayden, do you have Hayden in this range?
I do not. Although I have Dallin Hayden probably too low because had heard that Henderson was coming back. Now we don't really know. So I'll probably move Hayden up a little bit, and then he'll climb even higher if Henderson leaves.
Okay.
But I would not put him in this range today.
Okay. We don't need to talk about kind of, that third tier running back anymore. Just was curious because I'm just trying to add this up in my head. Not working so well. How about Trevor Etienne to Georgia? We might have buried a lead on this one. Maybe we should have done this one a little earlier. I know I just said I'm having a lot of trouble trusting Georgia players lately, but Trevor Etienne, Florida, I put in my bold predictions article this year that he would average over 15 fantasy points a game. And I believe he did or got very close to it. So I felt pretty good about that. He's leaving a dead end job at Florida. What? 15.18? Yay! Mm-hmm. Pretty good. Didn't get a lot right, but I got that one. To Georgia, who Kendall Milton's gone. DeJuan Edwards gone too, I believe. I don't think he had.
DeJuan Edwards is gone. Mm-hmm.
So you're left with guys that got significant touches last year. That Cash Jones.
Mm-hmm.
Who, Georgia did the Make-A-Wish thing already with Stetson Bennett. I don't think they're hankering to do it again with a running back. So Evan Roderick is like the other guy there.
Mm-hmm.
Paul got some touches. Roderick, I think, averaged like 10 yards a carry in the bowl game.
Yeah.
By the way. Not that FSU really put up a fight. And I'm so glad I wasn't on this show at all because I would have ranted about FSU fans need to get their fifis together. But Roderick looked good in that game. But other than Roderick and maybe Paul, I mean, what else do you really have there at running back? Not a lot. So I think ETN steps in there and is, 40% touch share of the backfield, pretty much locked up, guaranteed, minimum.
Yeah, I would feel pretty comfortable with that. I have him currently as my RB 7. So I have him right behind Raheem Sanders. I don't think South Carolina is a negative spot for Raheem Sanders. Not to get off topic,
I do.
You do? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it'll be a topic for another day. So interesting. But yeah, no, I'm still pretty high on ETN. He climbed a little bit in my rankings with this move to Georgia for sure.
Same. I have him at 7. I have him right above Sanders. And granted, again, this is with Travion still in there, Braylon Allen still in there. So he probably moves top 5-ish with that news. And I would actually, if I did a draft tomorrow, I would be tempted to take him over CJ Baxter.
I would not. I have CJ Baxter as my RB1 for CJ.
Yeah, we had that discussion shortly before I left, I believe. I did not agree. I thought Haynes looked better in the bowl game. I absolutely would prefer Haynes now. But
okay, fair enough.
Chip Trayanum. I don't know. He spent a ton of time, but Kentucky, been churning out CFF backs at the position for a while here, and that seems like a pretty good spot for a guy like Chip.
Yeah, absolutely. And this was a guy I talked about too. And then Harden was also, but I mentioned him last week when I kind of talked about my rankings overhaul. But, I think that is a pretty big news item where he was a guy who was almost left for dead, or, he had a little bit of buzz from some time at Ohio State, but he's still on a lot of waiver wires. So, from that to a guy who's in my top 30 at running back, he's my RB 29 right now. It's him, it's LaQuinn Allen, RJ Harvey, Jaden Ott, Taj Brooks, all right in that range for me.
Okay. I don't know what to do with him yet, so I don't have an informed opinion, but
fair enough.
Will probably be rising for me. Some bold performances I just wanted to highlight. Nico Iamaleava and Jackson Arnold both look like they belonged. I think if you've got either of those guys, you are sitting pretty happy with value at this point. Should probably be, without having actually sat down and looked at a board, I would say no worse than the 204, the two of those guys in drafts next year, the 204 to 206. I would not, they should be gone before the back half of the second. Do you agree with that?
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say that for C2C purposes, they are my QBs 2 and 3 right now. Just because there's so much uncertainty at the quarterback position there, that I think it's, give me the immediate production, especially from Nico, but also from Arnold. And then they were 5-star guys. They're at big time programs. So, and I like their skill sets enough that I think I can definitely see an NFL future for them too. So I was a little lower on those two compared to the other 3 of the big 5 quarterbacks last year, but they are now the top ones out of that group.
What do you think of Miller Moss? Do you have him ranked yet? Like I told you, I have him just sitting at the bottom of my rankings. I haven't put him anywhere yet. He's just sitting there unranked. But just looking at my list, I don't know. Top. I'm trying to quickly do the mental math in terms of guys that are leaving. Top 30 seem fair. Top 35, top 40. I don't want to get too aggressive. So I know he is Riley's quarterback, but he was also. I know Louisville, quote unquote, had a good defense this year, but I did look at the schedule. I don't really think
they had a lot of play. They had a lot of guys,
and they had guys missing
in that bowl game too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, you definitely have to look at it with that through that lens. And I'm still not convinced that he's going to be an NFL stud or anything like that. We've seen quarterbacks flash in the pan and then not really end up doing anything. So I don't want to get out too far over my skis either, but I have him as my QB 20 right now. I had him a little bit lower until we heard what Will Howard was doing, but with him going to Ohio State, Miller Moss does climb back up there. I have him at 20, right behind Aiden Childs, who I think has some CFF production there, even at Michigan State. So I broke down his schedule, and it fairly soft next year, but there are going to be some games where you definitely won't want to play him. But there'll be games where you definitely can play him. I still think he's got some NFL future as well. So he's right there with Childs and Avery Johnson, Preston Stone, right in that cluster.
What about Garrett Nussmeier's big day for LSU? Looks like he's just going to step in there and be their guy. I have him without removing anybody at 21 right now, QB 21. Pretty aggressive, but I think should be pretty high.
Yeah, I have him a QB 29. So, kind of right there. Not too much lower than you, but I think that
who are the couple guys you have right ahead of him?
I have Riley Leonard, Brady Cook, Garrett Green ahead of him. Garrett Green, mostly CFF value, but I think he could be really good for CFF.
Interesting. That seems very aggressive on Garrett Green.
A little bit. But I think he could be really good next year. And like we said, I'm kind of more looking at, how good can these guys be in like 1 year sample sizes. And
so
Baby Bo does have an extra year.
Nussmeier does not have the rushing upside, but you don't think that offense is going to just continue clicking on?
I think losing that much production at wide receiver as well with Neighbors and Thomas, and then, Denbrock stepping, not going to be there anymore. There's enough other pieces around Nussmeier that are not going to be there that I'm a little bit skeptical on his CFF production. I think he'll be startable for you. I think they will be a solid offense next year. Obviously, he's not going to be Jaden Daniels, but I do think there's some NFL potential there with him as well. So I don't see a high potential on either one of them, but there's enough of both to keep me intrigued on both sides.
Okay. Offensive coordinator, Kansas State last year, Colin Klein. Some say Colin Decker's doppelganger. I've never seen them in the same room at the same time, so I can't confirm one way or the other. Leaving Kansas State, going to Texas A&M to fill the same role there. He has this, I think, kind of touches 3 different quarterbacks. Will Howard, who left Kansas State, he's now at Ohio State as of a couple of days ago. Avery Johnson, who's now probably going to step into that job, we presume, at Kansas State. And then Connor Wegman, who is the starter and going to be his quarterback next year at Texas A&M. Kind of where we, positive, negatives, where we move in these guys based on, changes in situation here.
Yeah, I think this is, like I said, Colin Klein to Texas A&M impacts a lot of other quarterbacks that he has, worked with in the past. So Does he impact Will Howard at Ohio State now? Not necessarily, because it's a whole new system, but we saw Will Howard be productive in Colin Klein's system. I think the system at Ohio State will allow Will Howard to still be productive for CFF purposes. I think he'll probably, the production will come a little bit different than it did with McCord, but I think similar production levels you can kind of see from Howard. So not a guy you're going to be excited to start every week, but a guy you could throw in there, and not feel terrible about it, depending on the rest of your lineup, especially if it's, the third quarterback or something like that. And then Colin Klein at Kansas State, we saw him do, design packages for Avery Johnson to take advantage of that rushing ability. So we got to see Avery Johnson on the field. Avery Johnson at, Kansas State now as the starter. That's going to be a stock up. I think he could be really good for CFF as well. And then Connor Wigman with Colin Klein at A&M, given what I just said about how productive Will Howard was, how productive Avery Johnson was, even in small packages, Connor Wigman is head and shoulders as a quarterback better than both of them. He does have rushing ability as well. I thought he was a dual threat type quarterback coming out. So I think Connor Wigman is going to have a nice year for CFF as well, compared with Colin Klein. And then I'd like the Devy potential as well. So that puts Wigman as my QB1 right now. I am piggybacking off of you because you had him there for a while. But all three of these guys are stock ups for me.
I really worry about Avery Johnson. I think he is a very obvious sell candidate this year. If you've got him and you've got folks in your league that are clamoring for him.
I wouldn't disagree with that.
Friend of several of the shows here was on our early signing day show last year. So I'm not going to, I'm not going to say anything, rude or out of place about him. But I do think we really haven't seen any passing game stuff out of him. And that was really the big question mark for him. Like, we were like, yeah, he's athletic as all get out. He can run a lot. But there does, I think, as we've seen, especially at the Power 5, I guess now the Power 4 level, have to eventually be some level of passing upside there for you to succeed. Otherwise, it doesn't last long. You have to go down a step to really, thrive if you're going to do that. So I do worry quite about Avery. The other guys, hard to argue that it's stock down for Will Howard. And I just want to see Connor Wegman stay healthy for a year. I do worry a little bit about what that receiver room looks like, but overall.
Yeah, I think that's fair too. They did bring in Cyrus Allen from Louisiana Tech and one other person.
Yeah, and they were supposed to bring in Javon Harvey too, was the rumor for a while, and then they didn't. He just committed there the other day too, because I was like, this is just
somebody else was. So they have a couple guys there, and Noah Thomas is still there, who was fine. So I worry a little bit about it too, but Colin Klein, his system at Kansas State, they had nobody at wide receiver, and they still found a way to be productive.
One last one I want to talk about here, Colin, because I think where I think people sit on this discussion is going to just really depend on which guys they invested in last offseason. Sam Levitt to Arizona State. Was at Michigan State last year, was a borderline top 10-ish, 15-ish quarterback for us last year in the class. We thought he was really talented. We were kind of disappointed when he chose Michigan State because he looked like he might be going to Washington State, I believe, for a while. And we loved that as the next guy up there. He hates Jonathan Smith. So basically said as much in his goodbye message and wound up at ASU, which I find really interesting. I think at some point it's naive to say that there won't be some sort of competition between Rashada and Levitt. I just think where people sit on the realisticness of it actually being a competition / like the likelihood of Sam Levitt actually maybe being better than Jaden Rashada. Like, I'm not sure that they would have made this move if they were totally convinced on what Rashada did last year. And not to say Rashada was bad. I think he had his moments for sure. But I think there was some not very good mixed in there as well. And then he got injured. I don't think it was like a horrific injury. I think it was more like an excuse to not burn his red shirt. I don't think he used his red shirt. I don't think he played 4 games. So I'm interested. Like, I think, depending on you're heavy on Rashada. You probably are saying, oh, he needs depth. He was a lower rated guy. He's, coming in, he doesn't know the offense. And I don't necessarily think that's wrong, but I also think that there's, as a person who basically has zero of either of these guys, just was not super interested for various reasons. I'm not so sure that this isn't like he could go in and beat him out potentially, because I think if they would have gone for like a floor veteran guy if they were kind of happy with what Rashada was doing.
Yeah, I think that you're right. This is a Rorschach test where you're looking at this situation, and depending on who you have is the guy that you're rationalizing in your head, like, oh, my guy's still okay. Which to me, this is a 50-50 proposition. I have no idea which one of these guys is going to start. I think
it's more 60-40, but I get what you're saying.
Okay, who do you put at 60?
The incumbent, Rashada. Okay. I think you usually have to give the incumbent some sort of leeway. So
that's kind of where I'm at too. That's why I kind of think it is 50-50, where Rashada is the incumbent. He had 4 games there, so it's not a huge sample size. He looked okay, and then Sam Levitt was a player that I thought was better as a prospect. We didn't see him at all. So I still am kind of operating on the assumption that he's better, so I could see him beating out Rashada. But I have them ranked back-to-back in my rankings. Sam Levitt, QB 47, Jaden Rashada, QB 48. When we know who's winning the job, one of them will move up and one of them will move down.
I still have Rashada at 26, and that might be a little aggressive. Maybe I will have to chew on that a little bit. I dropped Levitt pretty precipitously because there was really just nothing to like about Michigan State last year in terms of like long-term projection. I'm sitting down with your boy Garrett Green, 57. Garrett Green's at 55.
Oh, too low on Garrett Green.
He'll move up a little bit. I mean, guys that I have like directly in front of him that are gone. Joe Milton, Jordan Travis. Kyle McCord will drop a little bit. That's pretty much it, though.
Garrett Green was a QB1 last year for fantasy purposes.
No, he wasn't.
I'm just saying. Yes, he was. He was QB 11.
No,
fantasy points per game. 26.7 fantasy, 26.17 fantasy points per game, and this is using pretty bland scoring.
Do you think that's sustainable? Obviously, you do. You have him ranked really high. It's a stupid question.
I do. I do think that's sustainable.
Interesting.
And also to answer your question from before, Drake May was the QB 9 on the year for fantasy purposes.
I have him at 13, but regardless, he was QB 1 or very close to it. So interesting. What league are you using?
The Toonland.
Okay, I used the home league, so
fair enough. The C2C home league,
the
one that I put together, that's 6-point passing touchdowns.
And that hurt Drake. Interesting. Okay, I wouldn't have guessed that. Interesting.
Fair enough.
That just surprises me. Okay. Interesting. Okay. So those are some of the news items. There's a ton more. You covered some of them when I was gone. I'm sure I didn't listen, but I'm sure they were on there.
Right. I tried.
And there are plenty more that we'll talk about over the next couple of weeks as we kind of settle into this early off season. DJU at Florida State's an interesting one. And I think talking about Kyle McCord at Syracuse is going to be interesting. Some other ones as well. What's his name? Riley Leonard, as you mentioned, could a player that I don't even really like, but with Dan Brock going there could be really interesting. So we'll touch on all of those. We did get a couple of questions here, so let's just touch on those. So somebody just asked about moving Year 1-0's main event, and he was in the chat here. I don't know if he still is around or not. So I will preface this by saying that we talked pretty heavily around mid-season. We did an episode. I'll have to go back and find it, main event, and I'll message you which one it is, where we really went in depth. And I literally don't think anything changed with now and then, except for there's literally no more hope left.
Yes.
for guys. Like, it was like, well, you can probably sell Brandon Innes by saying he's close, and then he didn't get there. Guys like
that hurts. Hand up. I would not have done that differently at the time. I was still holding out hope, and things lined up potentially well for him. Was not counting on Emeka Egbuka playing in the bowl game, and was not counting on that quarterback being
for 60
terrible, throwing 10 passes for like 60 yards. So if that had broken a little differently, I could have seen Innis still getting there. So that process, I am okay owning that process, even though it did not work out. And it was
I would rather shift that uncertainty to the other party. So for me personally, I've been fine moving him, but
I still haven't totally tanked Innis, by the way, like for C2C and stuff like that, because I think he could still be the QB or the second wide receiver in that system next year. I think there's a reasonable chance of that.
I don't think he can be any better than 3 personally, but we'll see.
Well, it depends on if Egbuka comes back. I don't know.
I know that Ohio State generally has not, given the fullest workload to their freshmen, but that room actually is not that full next year. I think Jeremiah Smith is one of the top 3 in there very, very quickly.
Yeah, I agree. So. I think Smith will take the other outside role.
Tate. So are we forgetting somebody here? Or?
No, Tate and Smith on the outside, and we'll throw Innis in the slot.
But you said you could be the wide receiver too.
Yeah, 2 for fantasy purposes.
Interesting.
Okay. I haven't totally ruled it out yet. Plus, I think Smith will start a little bit slower, but that's a topic for another day.
Okay. So if you are waiting, so for anybody that, again, if people have found us on the YouTube channel, et cetera, we have a theory that we subscribe to very hard here at C2C, which is called Year One Zeros. It applies to true freshmen wide receivers entering college. We have 8 statistical thresholds that are very minimal. If you hit any single one of those thresholds, you're good. You are probably the likelihood of you being an early NFL draft pick and having a productive NFL career from a fantasy perspective increased by 8 times, just an insane gap if you don't hit one of these categories. And usually
it's still not a super high percentage because, there's a lot of players.
It's 18% to 2%, is the difference essentially. It's 3%. It's not huge, but you can narrow the list significantly after the freshman year, essentially.
Yes.
And we usually do several times during the season, check in, here's who's hit it, here who hasn't. Probably should start thinking about selling these guys. Not a lot of opportunity left. Go do that. But if you've now waited till the end of the year and the 0 is official, as we said, there's no more hope left for anybody to kind of get in on. I think you have 2 options. You either hold them. If it's just dire, then you cut them. For some of these guys, I think you can certainly do that. Or I think you probably know which guys in your league are subscribing to campus2canton.com. I'm not saying they're doing better or worse, just the rankings and decisions they make are probably different than if you're kind of following what we're doing. They might not necessarily align. And I've seen people say I still have I love Cordell Russell to Colorado. I think that's going to be great. I think that's going to be a disaster. I would sell Cordell Russell to that sucker any day.
You can probably recoup whatever I can get.
You can probably recoup some value. I wouldn't be picky. You say, oh, you want to give him a 5th? Oh, I don't know. I paid a 3rd from last year. Okay, I can do a 5th. Just kind of get them off of your plate.
Yeah, I would even take a 7th.
Oh, I mean, I'm taking whatever I can get.
Yeah.
And I think the other option is probably the more palatable option is you kind of put them in a package. It's kind of hard to sell a lemon, in the as a car. I'm not talking about an actual lemon,
or a lemon
car. Straight up, you probably want to include that, because the other person knows what you're doing.
It's the veggies in the trade package. You just kind of hide them.
So tonight after dinner, I was still a little bit hungry, so I just made a peanut butter toast, a piece of peanut butter toast, and I was eating it, and I slather the peanut butter when I do it, and it kind of crowns in the top. And I was sitting there eating it. And my wife's sitting there and she goes, oh, I thought you put chocolate chips or something in the middle to bury under that. And I was like, it's my pills actually. But no, it's just the peanut butter. But yeah. So that's how I would deal with moving Year One Zeros right now. And I think that, Colin, you just chimed in as well. That's going to be the easiest way to do that.
Yeah.
We get us top supplemental draft prospects who aren't freshmen. I think it's too early in the offseason for me to give you that list. And
Chip Trainum would probably be on it though.
Yeah. And quite frankly, I think
not a first round pick like some people, wanted to say, but
I think it's not useful to build that list today because I think there's still a lot that's going to change. If you're not drafting tomorrow, I don't need that list tomorrow. I would prefer to hold out on that list as long as possible so we can have as much information before we give that to you. I haven't even really noticed guys across my leagues. I'm wondering if Dowdle's available in any leagues. He might be. He
might be available in some leagues. That would probably be a name. Another
Jordan
name
James might be too.
Potentially. Quali Conley is another name that I would look at for San Jose State. Kyrie Robinson gone. Probably not a guy that I'm going to invest in a lot, but I'm pretty confident he's in a fair number of he's available in most leagues probably. So
yeah,
a couple.
I have a couple leagues where like I have unlimited waivers, and I went at the end of the year and kind of scooped up some guys that like we talked about, that Jared talked about as future options on his show, Chasing the Natty, all those guys. So just some names that I started hoovering up a little bit that might be out there. Amari Thomas, the UAB wide receiver, could be available. Avery Johnson might honestly be available. Kentrell Bullock at South Alabama, the running back, is an interesting one. Dallin Hayden could be, depending on when your league drafted. He might be hanging around out there. Abu Sama, the running back at Iowa State, who broke out late last this past season, ran for like 300 yards against Kansas State. He might be out there. There's like some freshman guys that I think are
Ricky Hunt for Ohio.
Who?
He ran wild. Ricky Hunt.
Oh,
he
yeah,
ran
yeah,
wild in the bowl game, and
Yep.
C. Bangura's gone. So
Yep.
that's another name.
That's a good one.
I would be 100% positive he's available in waivers in your league, unless you're in like a 36-man league or something.
Yep. If you're looking for next year's Arliss Boardingham, I think it could be Kenyon Sadiq, who's at Oregon. Elijah Surratt. I saw Ferguson's coming back. Carlos Fernandez, who's at Washington State, wide receiver, true freshman last year. He could be a guy. Trayon Webb at Georgia is a guy that I saw on waivers in some leagues. I think is stepping in for ETN, could be a guy there. Quali Conley, as you said, I picked him up a couple of different places. These are just some guys off the top of my head as I'm looking around that Joey Aguilar might still be hanging out on leagues, depending on how many waivers you have, the App State quarterback. I heard a really interesting stat on him, though. I was listening to the early read, which is done by Reed Wallach, a guy that I met, I believe, through Better Sports, but we DM every now and then. Good guy. I've been on his show. We should have him on here. He does a lot of like college basketball and college football betting, and his show is like a pure betting show. Every week during the season, he does like a betting preview show, similar to what Nick does on our channel. But he did a bowl game one, and I think the person that he had come on and talk about App State, he had like a 30% like turnover worthy, or like some sort of like stupid percentage, but none of them were converting to turnovers at all. So like he's like was like really on the razor's edge of that being a productive player. So that could be a little bit more risky going into next year. Might not necessarily be a guy that you want. I'm trying to think if there's some other guys. Mackey Hughes or Mackay Hughes at Tulane might not have been added in your league because he kind of broke out late, the running back, but he had a pretty good year last year.
That'll be a slightly different system because Willie Fritz is now at Houston, but the Troy head coach moved over there, Summerall. So I think it's still going to be okay. Troy was good with Kamani Vidal. So don't worry about the change in system.
Justin Marshall, Colorado State running back / wide receiver, I think is interesting. We mentioned Jeremy Bernard and Denzel Boston at Washington. Both might be available. These are just players. I'm just trying to. Prince Strawn at Boise State could end up being the guy there next year if we like that offense. He could be a really nice player. So just some names there that I'm tossing out overall. That was no sort of informed plan behind those thoughts as I just spit out those names. But some early names if you want to start looking at some players to look at main event.
AJ Duffy too. He might be available in a fair amount of leagues. And now he's over at San Diego State with Sean Lewis.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Could be a good guy there. Let's see. Somebody also asked leveraging early draft hype to move your projected round 2-3 players. I should have asked for some clarification, but if we're talking about rookies, I mean, I'm always a proponent of trying to move rookies up into NFL pieces if you can, or college players as a whole. You know, player with a good outlook, you trade them up. Players on the downside, take what you can get, but you're probably fine trading them down. So in terms of like down means like younger or freshman supplemental pick, up means, you know, NFL player. So generally how I do things there. And then the last one, somebody said, is this the offseason with the most unknown from a player and rankings perspective so far? Maybe we lose a lot of quarterbacks, which I think is going to
and a lot of
make
wide
things
receivers.
interesting.
Yeah. I would say that I think this is the offseason with the most uncertainty and unknowns in terms of rankings because we lose such a strong crop of wide receivers. We lose a lot of quarterbacks, and especially for CFF purposes, but there's not really anybody that we have coming up that like we can point to and be like, yes, this guy is a first round draft pick. We don't have the Caleb Williams. We don't have the Drake May. We don't have the CJ Stroud, the Bryce Young. There's nobody like that this year. So quarterback pretty uncertain. And then I think a lot of running backs took some pretty big hits in terms of value this past year as well. So when I did my rankings overhauls, I have no tier 0 players. I also have no tier 1 quarterback and no tier 1 running back.
Yeah, I could see that. Just quickly looking at mine. Takes a little. You have to squint a little bit, but I think I would put Judkins in my tier 1.
We'll see where he ends up in terms of and now that he's in the portal and stuff, because that could impact his CFF value. But I think Judkins is going to be a solid running back at the NFL level, but I don't think he's going to be this elite prospect or anything. And I think you can get a lot of solid running backs at the NFL level.
Yep. Very good point there. All right. Well, I think that's going to do it for tonight's show, guys. We're going to what?
National championship.
Yeah, we are going to preview that real quick. I wanted to just throw this in. If you're listening to this on the podcast form, you don't have to listen to the rest of this. Go check out Home Field. Go check out campuscan.com. Go check out the YouTube page. All that good stuff.
Subscribe.
I'm back for good now. So yes. And if it's rookie season, if you just listen to our stuff, but you're not really subscribed, we have a ton of stuff to help you with rookie drafts. We might be working on something else that will help you that we can announce shortly. But a ton of tools and stuff, a ton of data you can go in and filter yourself. So go ahead and check all that out at campus2canton.com. National championship game preview here real quick, Colin. I thought this was going to be Bama, Washington. Turned out being Michigan, Washington. I hate Michigan. But alas, here we are. Depending on where you're looking, is between 4.5 and 5.5 point favorites for Michigan. Game total right around 55. I think I put Washington to cover. I haven't sprinkled money line yet. I think I will. I want to see if I can get it I want to shop around a little bit. What do you think?
So I also hate Michigan. So I am definitely not rooting for Michigan. So that sways any bets that I would place. It sways a little bit there. I look a little bit harder at ways that I think Washington can get there. But I did put a future on Washington to win this game before this was even settled. And I thought it was on DraftKings. It was on FanDuel. So I'm pulling it up here to see exactly what I got it at. But I do like, you said it was a 4.5.
It's right between 4.5 and 5.5, depending on what book you're looking at. Yeah.
I like that for Washington. I think that, Washington's offense is really good across the board. It's tough to find a weak spot on that offense. Assuming that Dylan Johnson is going to play. So, yes, Michigan has a good defense, but I still like Washington. I got them at plus. Oh, so I didn't put it on the game specifically, but I got it at plus 700 before it started. I placed this bet on December 3rd.
Oh, okay. Interesting. I think it's going to be interesting because I think the defensive weakness of Washington is the rush defense, which I think, Michigan will be able to exploit. And I kind of think vice versa as well. I know Michigan's got a pretty good front seven and they can get after the quarterback, but I don't know that they can cover them enough on the back end consistently. I do think that Washington can hit some big plays in this game. So, and I mentioned, I don't know, who's the really good corner that's a true sophomore for Michigan? Will something Johnson?
Yeah, that sounds right.
I would presume they put him on a Dunze. Stylistically, I don't know that he can cover a Dunze. like the ways that they get Odunze the ball with a lot of like the back shoulder stuff and just kind of like, I'm going to throw it in this weird spot and only like, I don't know that that's going to be a great matchup for Michigan. Like I'd be interested to see how they handle it. Gun on my head, I'd say maybe Michigan by 3, but I think anything more than a field goal, I like Washington if I'm betting it. And I do think there are avenues to Washington winning. So I'm interested. I'll be watching the game. I think it'll be pretty good. I'm glad that we're recording this tonight so I can watch it.
Yes.
Oh man, I'll tell you off air.
Okay.
I might miss part of it. That's oof. But yeah, all right. That's my opinion on it.
Yeah, I think I kind of see that. I think Michigan is probably the favorite, but I definitely see paths where Washington can win. Like I said, that offense is just going to be really tough to stop. Like this is going to be the best offense and most well-rounded offense that Michigan has played all year, and they've shut down some other solid offenses. Alabama's offense really did start to take off there down the stretch once they kind of let Milroe run and do his thing. But if you can limit Milroe's rushing, it kind of limits that offense. Ohio State, still a good offense, but not what we're used to. And if you can take away Marvin Harrison Jr., it was tough for them to still beat you with anybody else. So Washington is going to be the best offense they've played all year. There's so many outs for Washington's offense, so many guys that can score and be dangerous, that I think I could see a path where Washington wins. I'm definitely rooting for Washington, though.
The big killer for Washington is that I'm not sure. I think we'll know within the first 2 drives how healthy Dylan Johnson is and how much that, therefore, Michigan will have to respect the run. I think Tybo Rogers is an interesting player, but you're not running him between the tackles, really.
No.
Like, it's certainly not more than a handful of times per game. And I don't even know who like their other like between the tackles running back is. They're not someone who like I would consider good.
No.
So,
Cam Davis, I don't know if he's healthy. I know he was at Washington.
So, I mean, we'll know, like I said, within the first 2 drives how healthy Dylan Johnson is. And if they don't have to respect the run, I do think that because Penix is not that mobile, like if Penix was more mobile, if this was like second year Indiana Penix, I think that could be overcome, but he just doesn't have that anymore. So I will say, I think we'll know who's going to win that game by the end of the first quarter.
Yeah, I'm just going to be really annoyed if Michigan does what they did to Penn State, where they just basically put 6 to 7 linemen on the field and just literally run it down their throat and take 4 yards, 5 yards, 4 yards, 4 yards, 5 yards, 4 yards, 20 yards,
I will say, I think JJ McCarthy, I think based on what he's done in big games, if you're a coach, you have to be terrified of letting him unleash in the championship game, right? He hasn't been good in these games. Like just flat out, he has not been good in these games.
Yeah, he hasn't cost them any games, but he also hasn't.
He cost them the game last year.
Well, last year, yes. I was this year, but he hasn't cost them any games this year. But he also hasn't won them any games either.
Yeah, so I think if they are letting JJ cook, who's that corner for Washington who I really like watching? Jabbar, is it Jabbar Muhammad? Is that his name or Jabbar?
Yeah.
I love that kid. He is fun. He will pick off JJ McCarthy. If McCarthy throws the ball more than 20 times, he has at least 1 interception. I'm calling it now. So there's a prop. Maybe if I can go find an interception prop for specific players. I doubt even offshore stuff has that.
Oh, for defensive players.
Yeah, like if I could find a prop for Jabbar Muhammad to pick off JJ McCarthy at plus 600 or something, I would go play that. But probably isn't out there.
Probably not. But maybe Prize Picks, you could pick McCarthy interceptions if it's out there.
That's true. Promo code Campus or promo code C2C.
Promo code C2C. Get a deposit match up to $100.
Yeah, it's true. All right. Well, that's going to do it for tonight's show, guys. We'll be back next week with Campus Life, and I will be here for now until I'm dead.
Well,
I can't make that.
Or until you decide to take another break or vacation,
What does Dwight Schrute say on The Office? Something like, if I'm dead, you guys have been dead for weeks or something.
Yeah.
Like quote, when he has the extra key to the office. So there you go. All right. Well, that's going to do it for tonight's show. We'll be back next week. Thanks for tuning in here, guys. As always, I'm Austin.
And this is Colin.
Have a good one.